If you went and you had an entanglement, for example, the thing that would bother me is not you being entangled with somebody else, would not be you having an affair or sleeping with somebody else. That in and of itself doesn't bother me.
What bothers you?
Why?
Wait. But what would bother you?
No, that's why. That's what would bother me.
Okay.
You know, it's like the why of it would bother me. Not the impact. And this is kind of like my initial thought of this years ago. I was a teenager, I think, or early 20s, and I read this fascinating book by this activist who walked from India to Moscow to Berlin to London and then took like a boat or something to New York and then walked to Washington, D.C. as a protest against nuclear proliferation. And he had really built up a big following. This is long before social media or whatever, right? And he was in Paris and he met this reporter who was like, and they just hit it off. And she had been married for many years and she was so into him. And this thing started to heat up and she said, "Excuse me, I need to make a phone call." And while he was in the room, she goes and calls her husband and says, "I'm with this guy. I've met this guy, who I've been like reporting on. And I'm staying in Paris for a week and like, we're going to hook up. Like, I'm sorry if that hurts you." And like, basically, goodbye. Hangs up. Boom. And then they had basically like a week-long affair, whatever. And then he had to keep walking on to London and on it went. And then he wrote about later, like, they didn't stay in touch really or whatever. But he said, like, he saw them at some gala or something in Washington, D.C. a few years later, and they were together. And like, she even came up and introduced her husband to him. And it was as though that hadn't happened. Mm. And so obviously it did and had some impact in their relationship, but there was this upfrontness that sort of took away the idea that it was an affair, in that it still is, but it changes the equation when one person is saying, like when you bring consciousness to it. So therefore, to me, what it brought back to me, just to finish that thought, is that it's not like that had happened as one thing. If I was the husband in that situation, my question would have been like, why? And she might have said like, "You've been boring in bed. You're like watching too much porn and you're not giving me enough attention," or like, "Our life has become stale and I felt like I was pushing and I gave up," or whatever. And then he might have said, "Well, screw you, I'm done." Or he could have said, "You know what? Like, yeah, I actually need to improve. What you did hurt me and may be wrong, but maybe I also have a part in this because we're in a relationship." And then what does he do? So therefore, I think it's the why, not the what.
Interesting.
What do you think about that?
I think that's amazing that he was able to react to it that way.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I don't think where I am right now in my life, I would react the same way. I feel like if one of us felt like they were going to have an entanglement, I think that's a conversation that should happen beforehand, not when the entanglement is happening.
Or not when you're like in the hotel room and you're like, "Oh my
Exactly.
God, like I'm about to bust a nut here."